Hi, my name is Nate Tweedy, and today I'm going to be talking about green energy. Climate change is a word that's often thrown about in society, but a lot of people don't know what it means or what causes it. Climate change is a direct result of increased greenhouse gas productions in the world. Greenhouse gases stay in the Earth's atmosphere for hundreds of years, and they trap solar heat from the sun, creating a greenhouse effect, hence the name. The two most prominent sources of greenhouse gases are methane and CO2, and they are produced as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, oil, and coal. Now, there are hundreds of negative effects that climate change and global warming has on our planet, but there's three big ones. Number one is that it increases the acidity of our oceans. This is resulting in a huge loss of marine life and especially decreasing the size of our global coral reefs, which are connected to billions of marine species. Second is we're seeing a lot more extreme tropical storms and droughts. This is something that can be seen in the United States on the East Coast over the past decade. Hurricanes have been significantly more devastating and damaging to communities, and that is a result of climate change. Finally, it results in the melting of the polar ice caps, and this doesn't seem like a huge deal at first, but it increases sea levels, and this has a huge effect on our coastal cities across the world. In fact, an African coastal city called Jakarta, which is the home of 10 million people, is projected to be submerged completely underwater by 2050. Now, all these greenhouse gases are being produced by the burning of fossil fuels, oil, and coal. It is resulting in climate change. So the world has turned to green energy or sources of energy that don't produce greenhouse gases in order to combat the effects that climate change is having on our world. Now, there are several types of green energy. We're going to be focusing on the four big ones today, which are nuclear power, wind, solar, and hydro. First, we got to look into nuclear power, which is built on the idea of fission. And the fission details splitting an atom apart, and when that process occurs, a lot of heat is produced. This was discovered back in the 1930s. So in a nuclear power plant, uranium atoms are split, which produces a lot of energy, which then boils water, because heat is radiating off that energy, boils water, which produces steam. Those at the nuclear power plants, what many believe is smoke, it's not smoke, it's steam. And that steam spins a turbine, which is connected to a generator, which produces electricity. Nuclear power produces about 20% of the U.S. total energy production levels, so it definitely plays a huge role. However, there are several risks associated with it. Number one is the idea of nuclear waste, something that is left over after the nuclear fission process, and there's a lot of question on what do we do with this nuclear waste. There's not a solid answer on that right now, and it's extremely deadly. And number two, you have the issues of nuclear power plant disasters, Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, where radiation was let out of the plant, exposed to people, and individuals died as a result of it. The future of nuclear power plants is all built on the idea of nuclear fusion, which is combining atoms together. It's the same process that our sun uses, and it could produce an extraordinary amount of energy. In fact, scientists predict that the whole world could be run on a few nuclear fusion power plants, but of course this technology isn't available yet, so scientists are working to make it happen. Second, we look at hydropower, which is one of the world's oldest energy sources. In fact, in the US, it was first implemented back in the 1880s, but it was really used in the early 1930s and 40s is when we saw a huge increase when the dams were built as an initiative to hire workers struggling in the Great Depression. Now, hydro dams are super simple. Water flows through them through a pipe, which spins a turbine connected to a generator, and the dams basically just let in how much water comes in, comes out, and it determines the energy production levels. Produces a lot of energy. In fact, it produces about 15% of the U.S. energy production comes from hydroelectric dams. But there are also risks associated, much like nuclear power. There's a big flood risk. This isn't a huge issue in the U.S., but it's definitely a big issue in impoverished countries where poor infrastructure exists. It also has a huge impact on the environment, especially you see this in the West Coast. Salmon from the states of Montana and Idaho will journey to the West Coast in Oregon in order to have offspring, or sorry, they'll journey back. And the dams have made this really difficult for salmon to move through the rivers, and in fact, this has resulted in a huge decrease of the U.S. salmon population. The future of hydropower is all about modernizing old plants to make them more efficient and produce more energy. But again, these two energy sources, nuclear power and hydropower, are green energy and they don't produce any greenhouse gases. Move on to solar power, which is super simple. Sun shines on the solar power, which is PV cells, which absorbs the energy. And that's how it works. The big breakthrough in solar power occurred in 1954 when they started using silicone solar panels, and that's what we use today. There's not a whole ton of risk associated with solar power. It's produce as much energy as nuclear power and hydropower, only producing about 7% of the total US production. But it's the two big drawbacks for solar power is it's very expensive and it's unpredictable. You're relying on the weather for sources of energy. However, solar prices have fallen over the past decade or so, which has renewed the interest in solar power in the US especially. And there's some government officials that hope that implementing more solar farms in states like New Mexico and Arizona could power about half of the US energy production by 2050. And the final source of energy we'll look at is wind power. Wind hits a propeller, which spins the propeller, spins a turbine. This has been used for decades and decades, but especially was popular after the 1970s when gas and oil prices exploded. That's when we saw a renewed interest in winds. There's a big threat. It's unpredictable, limited locations you can set it. You need strong wind powers, and it's a big threat to wildlife, especially bird species. But definitely there is an interest to put wind farms all across the states of North Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana because there's a lot of open space, and then that could produce a lot of energy for the United States. But case in point, these energy sources are key in combating climate change. This is an argument. This is just fact, scientific fact. In order to fight climate change, we're going to need to turn away from fossil fuels and greenhouse gases, and green energy is the way that we can do that. And hopefully over the next coming years, these energy sources will play a bigger role in the U.S. energy productions. Thank you. Have a great day.